Good evening and welcome to the Forest Art Museum. Thank you all for braving the weather and joining us this evening for tonight's lecture. I'm Megan Russ, educator of interpretation. And I want to thank you all for joining us for tonight's lecture, A Magnificent Legacy, French Art in the Mellon Collection, presented in conjunction with the exhibition Van Gogh, Monet, Degas, and Their Times, the Mellon Collection of French Art from the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. This exhibition is on view in our Ingram Gallery through May 5th. We are very pleased to have Kimberly Jones with us to present this evening's lecture. Kimberly Jones received her PhD from the University of Maryland, a former museum fellow at the Musée National du Château de Pau and the Musée d'Orsay, Paris. She joined the curatorial staff of the National Gallery in 1995. Jones was a collaborator and catalogue co-author for Jean-Paul Laurent, Peintre d'Histoire, an exhibition at the Musée d'Orsay and the Musée des Augustins, Toulouse. She has served as a curator and catalog author for a number of exhibitions at the National Gallery of Art, including Degas at the Races, From Impressionism to Modernism, the Chesterdale Collection, Impressionism and Post-Impressionist Masterpieces from the National Gallery of Art, Degas Cassat, and Frédéric Bazille, The Birth of Impressionism. She's currently working on an exhibition, Degas at the Opera, which opens at the Musée d'Orsay this fall and at the National Gallery in March 2020. At this time, we gratefully acknowledge our sponsors, Platinum sponsor HCA Foundation on behalf of HCA Healthcare, TriStar Health, Hospitality sponsor Union Station Hotel, and Gold sponsor HD Hill. Van Gogh, Monet, Degas, and Their Times is supported in part by our 2019 Frisk Gala patrons. And as always, we appreciate the continuing operating support from Metro Nashville Arts Commission, Tennessee Arts Commission, and the Nashville Endowment for the Arts. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming Kimberly Jones.
Well, thank you, Megan, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you also for the invitation. This is my very first visit to Nashville. Not the last, to be sure. It's been wonderful being here. Everyone keeps apologizing for the rain, but really, it's fine. I had a whole day without rain, so it got off to a great start. And of course, I'm so delighted to be here talking about the Mellon collection, the Mellon Legacy. My very first exhibition at the National Gallery was on Degas at the Races. So I feel very much at home looking at all these horses. I spent a lot of time looking at equine figures. So I feel very much akin to Paul Mellon. And I feel very much akin because the National Gallery of Art and the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts are really sister institutions because of this Mellon connection. That Mr. Mellon was a great patron of both institutions, enriched us with his great art, his great support, his great passion, and that really has brought our two museums together. So it's always a thrill and a joy for me to be able to revisit this wonderful collection and to see it in a new context. It's always very illuminating. Now, of course, the name Paul Mellon, and in fact, the Mellon family in general, is very much associated today with French art. The wonderful collections built by Paul Mellon and also his sister Elsa Mellon, who I'll be talking about shortly, which greatly enriched the National Gallery of Art and the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in particular. One thing I'm going to point out in advance, I'm sure many of you have already had the opportunity to see the wonderful exhibition just down the hall. And if not, I'm sure many of you will go back many, many times because they are such wonderful paintings. In my lecture, I've actually highlighted the captions of works in the exhibition in blue. The reason I did this is so that you can easily connect with those art, but also to underscore the fact that the Mellon Legacy wasn't limited to one museum or even two museums. It was far-reaching. The philanthropic spirit of the Mellon family ran deep and wide, and their generosity has expanded throughout the United States and well into England and even into France. So it really is a tremendous legacy. There are many great collectors in history. When one thinks of the Havemeyers, you think of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. When you think of the Potter Palmers, you think of Chicago. But it's very rare to have a name that is associated with so many institutions, where the generosity has reached so many people in so many places. It makes the Mellon Legacy very unique and very rich. I'm just showing you just a little teaser of some of the wonderful works from the Mellon collection at the National Gallery, and of course, at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond. Now, the Mellon story goes back even farther, and it doesn't really start with French art. It does sort of end there, but initially it starts in a whole different tone with the founding of the National Gallery of Art, which was founded by Andrew W. Mellon, who was, of course, the father of Paul and Elsa. He was a banker. He also served as the Secretary of Treasury. He served as the United States ambassador to the Court of St. James in the United Kingdom. A very long and august history. He also began to collect art. And when he was in London in particular, he was very interested in seeing the National Gallery in London. And he noted that the United States did not have a comparable institution. We did not have a national museum that served the nation. And so he made a proposal that he offered his collection of art and the money to found a museum, provided Congress would provide the land and also the continuing funding, the operational funding. As some of you probably have heard, and I know all too well, sometimes that doesn't work so well because when the government shuts down, the National Gallery closes and we don't actually get paid, so we don't have an operating budget, but it was a good idea in principle. Andrew Mellon did not live to see the legacy. He actually died very shortly before the groundbreaking in 1937, so it really fell to his son, Paul Mellon, who actually was the first president of the board and sort of took up the mantle of being the great Mellon sponsor of the National Gallery of Art. Now, when the National Gallery of Art opened on March 17th, 1941, an interesting factoid, the National Gallery did not own a single 19th century French painting. Nothing. Zero. Big goose egg. Today we have more than 500 19th century French paintings and more than 800 French paintings in total, all of which has come after the fact. The gift that Andrew Mellon gave of more than 100 works of art had many magnificent treasures, including 37 paintings that he had acquired from the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, which has been a subject of some debate over the years, which included magnificent Rembrandts and Botticellis and Titian and Gainsborough and Turner and Goya and Velázquez. But French art was notably absent. In fact, only 3 French paintings were present in the 100 works that Andrew Mellon gave, all 18th century paintings, a painting by Lancret and 2 by Chardin. Andrew Mellon explained this very simply, that this was not his personal taste, and he said, "I hope others who know this school better than I do will contribute such works to the National Gallery." Now, his prophecy proved correct, and very much so in the form of the gifts from his own children. But Paul Mellon didn't start out with French art either. He actually was a great Anglophile. He studied in Cambridge. He spent quite a bit of time in the UK. Remember, his father was the ambassador to the Court of St. James. And so he didn't start with French art, but rather with British art. And I'm sure some of you have had the opportunity to see the exhibition of sporting art, also up in the galleries right now. His first acquisition was this painting, Pumpkin with the Stable Lad, painting by George Stubbs, which he acquired in 1936. So this is the first work he acquired. Stubbs would be a great favorite of his. He acquired a number of paintings by Stubbs, but also beautiful paintings by Reynolds, Gainsborough, Constable. I mean, his collection was extraordinary in terms of the depth, the quality, the richness of it. But he had plans for that. In 1966, he bequeathed that collection, he gave the collection, he was still alive, to Yale University of Art, Gallery. He'd gotten his undergraduate degree there in 1929, so he was an alumni. And so he gave them his great collection as well as the funds to build an extraordinary museum, which is now known as the Yale Center for British Art in New Haven, Connecticut, just across the street from the Yale University Art Gallery. It is a phenomenal museum, built largely with his collection. It's continued to grow and expand since then. It opened in 1974. And he also gave funds to found the Paul Mellon Center for British Art in London, which is essentially a research facility and provides scholarships to allow aspiring art historians to continue their research in London. So there's this cognate there. So how does he get from there to France? How does he cross the channel? Well, there are two women in particular who really deserve the credit for that. The first of them is his elder sister, Elsa Mellon. Elsa was his elder sister, the only daughter of Andrew W. Mellon. In 1921, she moved with her father to Washington to serve as hostess when he became the secretary of the treasurer. She then went with him to London to continue that role as he served as the American ambassador. And in 1926, she married David K. Bruce. But by that time, she'd already begun to collect art, and her interest was definitely, decidedly in French paintings. Her collection was small scale. The works that she acquired were works that were designed to be installed in private homes. These were works that she lived with. They were in her apartment that she lived with on a daily basis. Beautiful little jewels of paintings, these wonderful intimate paintings. I mean, this Monet, it's blown up huge. It's tiny. It's this beautiful little gem of a painting that's absolutely exquisite. This beautiful Berthe Morisot. And so these were paintings that were human scaled. These were works that were intimate in terms of subject and tone, and their very function. They were not meant as museum pieces. In fact, Paul Mellon, in his memoirs, recounts a conversation that he had with Chester Dale, who was another great collector at the National Gallery of Art, who amassed a tremendous collection of French modern painting, big, ambitious paintings. I mean, Chester, he was a man of ambition, and he just poo-pooed Elsa's collection, and he didn't think they were National Gallery quality. They were too small, too insignificant. He thought you should be buying significant things. Paul did not agree with this at all. He actually did believe that small works of art were very important. And Elsa believed that too. And so she built this extraordinary collection of all these wonderful little luminous paintings. She loved Impressionism, these beautiful plein air landscapes by Monet and Pissarro, wonderful little works by the Nabis. She was particularly fond of Pierre Bonnard and Edouard Vuillard. She owned 9 paintings by Bonnard and 10 by Vuillard. And one can certainly see what the appeal, particularly for Vuillard, who essentially focused on scenes of the intimate and sort of domestic life of women engaged in very mundane daily activities, drinking coffee, having conversations, getting ready for bed. Elsa was always a very private individual, even more so in her later years. She became not quite reclusive, but she definitely shied away from the limelight. She liked her privacy, so I think she probably felt a certain kinship with these very intimate, quiet scenes that Vuillard produced. And she loved Renoir. She loved Renoir the most. She owned 22 paintings by Renoir of various scales, including very beautiful, very important paintings. I mean, I think today no one would argue that Renoir's painting of Madame Monet and her son in the garden at Argenteuil is not an important painting. In fact, it was a painting that Monet loved so much that he kept it in his bedroom until his death. So clearly it was a work that resonated, that it's a painting of family life. It's, again, a very intimate kind of work. These were paintings that she loved and she cherished. Now, when she passed away in 1969, she bequeathed her entire collection to the National Gallery of Art, including over 80 Impressionist and Post-Impressionist paintings. I should say that Chester Dale was gone by then. So as the president of the board, he may very well have actually pushed against that particular gift. So I'm very glad cooler heads led the day. And so when the East Building opened in 1978, it included this wonderful installation of some 69 paintings from her collection. They hung there for many, many years in these wonderful little intimate galleries. And it was very appropriate because after the building of the West Building, the main building, which was created and opened in 1941, the National Gallery grew and expanded as they do. And so finally, it was decided a second building, the East Building, the modern building, needed to be built. And it was built with funds donated by Paul and Elsa. So they basically built this building. And so to have this sort of homage to her, I think, was very appropriate. Paul was very pleased with this installation of his sister's collection, saying that these small, intimate galleries enhance their intimacy and human appeal. Now, Elsa isn't terribly well known, in large part because her gift was so restrained and has been limited to the National Gallery although, of course, the works are exhibited and shared regularly. But it's really Paul Mellon. When people think of Mellon and French painting, they think of him and his extraordinary collection. And his collection, again, was wide-ranging, French art as well as British and American. Ultimately, he donated more than 1,000 works of art to the National Gallery alone. I mean, it's one of the greatest gifts ever given by a single collector. And his tastes were very much his own, but also shared. And I include these two photos. I think it's nice, these snapshots. The one on the left is from 1966 to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the founding of the National Gallery. The Mellons lent a number of works from their exhibition. Did I write the number? I think I have it somewhere in my notes. They basically submitted an exhibition of works from the collection of Mr. and Mrs. Paul Mellon, Elsa Mellon Bruce, and then here in 1977, just prior to the opening of the East Building that he helped fund. So his connection to the National Gallery essentially runs very deep, long before he ever started collecting works of art. But he does have similarities with Elsa. They had certain shared tastes. For example, Renoir. They both loved his works, and you can certainly see this exquisite painting, a little portrait of Nini in the current exhibition. But again, you can see how it connects and relates to works that Elsa was acquiring in terms of scale, the handling, both works from the 1870s, Renoir, a sort of prime Impressionist painting with that wonderful flickering brushwork, the beautiful quality of the flesh, and paintings like these wonderful intimate scenes of the family. Again, something that very much central to Renoir's art, particularly in the 1890s and in the early 20th century, once again, reflecting that shared love. The artist that they most love to share it in common is, of course, Lucien Boudin, the great marine painter. They acquired an extraordinary collection. Paul Mellon acquired some 24 paintings by Boudin, and ultimately gave a total of 32 works by Boudin in all media to the National Gallery. Elsa owned 13, and as a result, the National Gallery now owns 61 works by Boudin. It's the largest collection of works by Boudin outside of France, which is very impressive. And in fact, to celebrate the centenary of Paul Mellon's birth in 2007, we organized with the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts an exhibition devoted to the work of Lucien Boudin, allowing us to reunite both the Richmond and the Washington collections of Boudin's for the first time ever. They'd ever been seen together as a group. Now, as I mentioned, Paul Mellon did not agree with Chesterdale's belief that bigger is better, that for art to be worthwhile, it needs to be grandiose. He believed in the power of small art. In his memoirs, he actually commented on this. My own feeling is that size has nothing to do with the quality or the importance of a work of art. Just as preliminary drawings or sketches in oil or pastel often have an immediacy and an emotional appeal far greater than that of the final canvas. I am now even more convinced that small is beautiful. I'm just going to show you some more of these wonderful works. These beautiful watercolors you see on the left belong to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, but because they are works on paper, have to limit light exposure, which is why they could not be included in the current touring exhibition. The second woman who had a profound impact on Paul Mellon's taste for French art was his second wife, Rachel Lambert Lloyd, commonly known to her friends and family by the nickname Bunny, although I've heard from reliable sources that she actually really did not like that nickname. She was quite an extraordinary woman. She was a great horticulturalist, amassed an extraordinary library of horticultural texts, a garden designer. Her most famous contribution, which some of you may know from visiting the exhibition, is she designed the rose garden at the White House. She was invited by her friend Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy to design the rose garden in 1961, which she did. So that's her probably most famous contribution in